Hey, in this video we're going to be making a sign in with Google button that uses Google's Oauth2 Authentication API. I'll show you all the steps needed to set this up, including what's needed on Google's side. To start off, I'm using Visual Studio Code and a SvelteKit app, but most of the code we're going to create will be plain HTML and TypeScript, which you can apply to any Node framework like Express, Nest, and so on. Here I'm starting off on the code for my homepage. As you can see, I have a sign in with Google link and it's centered on a full screen background image. We also need to make sure our framework has the Google API's NPM package installed, and you can install that with npm install Google APIs. Now let's go to Google's API console and set up some things in there. From that site, we need to create or pick a project, and then pick an API from the API library. We can just choose the Google Plus API and enable it. Then go to Credentials and click Create Credential and choose Oauth2. Here you might be required to fill out some contact information first. If so, just answer all the questions and come back to this page. From the dropdown, we want to choose Web Application and give it a name. Then enter the server the request will come from, and localhost works fine here if that's all you're using at the moment. Next, provide a URL where responses will be sent, and we'll eventually have a /Google/callback URL. And then finally click Create, and then you need to somehow save the client ID and secret that they give you right here. Now back in our app, let's create a JavaScript module somewhere, which will just be an external TS or JS file. In here, I'm going to create an exportable function called Google API that will simply return an OAuth client from our Google API's package. We're going to need to connect to it multiple times in our app, so it makes sense to have it in this file, and then we just call this file when needed. This function wants the client ID, client secret, and the callback URL we just got back from the Google Cloud Console. Now to make this work, we can go back to our home page and use whatever code you have access to generate the URL on the back end. For me, I'm going to have an API endpoint that we can fetch from. And again, I'm using SvelteKit, and this is an example of the most basic get endpoint in SvelteKit. If you're using a different framework, just use that framework's API endpoint method and call the same code we're going to create in the middle of it. When we reach this page, we'll call our Google API module file and save the result. We then build the URL by using the generate Auth URL function. And this one wants the access type and a list of scopes. And the access type will be offline, as we want to be able to get refresh tokens and keep them logged in. And the scope will be this, which is just going to allow us to access basic info about their profile. And then we just return the URL that we get back in the JSON response of the API endpoint. Then back on the home page, we can have a variable that will be the URL to go to, and then we'll run a standard fetch function to grab the URL from that API. And we want to do that before or when the page loads. In SvelteKit, the on-mount code is how we do it. Just know how your framework does this, and also be aware it needs to be asynchronous probably. Then set the URL of our link to this variable, and in Svelte you can insert variables with curly braces. Before we click on the button though to test it, we need to make the callback URL. So here I have a file in a new folder I created in /Google/callback. And this file is just another basic API endpoint again. And if you didn't know, the user technically leaves your site to go log into Google. So this is what reads the response when Google sends them back. The first we need to do is use JavaScript to grab the code parameter in the query string that Google provides. We then call our Google API module again and await a get token function. In the function, we send the code value from the URL, and this will return an object with a bunch of properties, but all we care about is the tokens. So we can grab only that by destructuring it like this. We then need to set the tokens in our Oauth client object like this, and then save the refresh token somehow so that we can reuse it. For now, I'll just save it in a cookie, which works like this in Svelte. And the token might not exist, so we probably should only create the cookie if we actually did get a refresh token. And in the end, we'll send the user home, and this is how you redirect in Svelte. Just make sure to redirect and set cookies using your Node framework's code. And now we can test it out. If we click the button, we have to log in or pick a Google account. We then need to allow this app to have access, and then we are redirected back to our homepage. Now, to take advantage of our now logged in user, we can modify our homepage to not show the login button if they are logged in and show their name instead. To do that, on our homepage load function, we can also call another API to check if they are logged in. We'll make a session folder in our Google API folder and repeat our get API endpoint script. In here though, we're going to grab the cookie and have a placeholder for the user's info. If the cookie was found, we'll import our Google API module again and set the credentials to be the refresh token from the cookie. We then need to check if the token expired, and that'll mean that there'll be a new refresh token in the response. And if that's true, we can just update the cookie with the new one. Below that, we call the Oauth function from Google's API package, so import that on top now too. And here we have to specify the version and send the auth info from above. Finally, we can get the user's info from that by awaiting that object's userinfo.get function. And if we log the results, here's all the properties we have access to. We probably only care about the data object as it has the user's name. So we'll set that as our user variable, and then we'll return it in a JSON response. Back on our home page, we can now save the response from that to another new variable, and then do some vanilla JavaScript logic to hide the button if the user is set, and show the name too. Svelte has a better way to do this if we wanted, and I'm sure your framework does as well. But there we go. Now we know how to create a session for our app with Google as the authentication provider. In your app, you'd want to constantly check for the cookie and the token status on each request. In SvelteKit, that's done in the hooks file, but should be possible with other frameworks also. But if you have any questions about this video, let me know in the comments, and thanks for checking this out.